father kicked me out when I refused to give my inheritance to my brother. I never really felt like I belonged in my own family. That might sound dramatic, but when you grow up in a house where you're practically invisible, you start to wonder if you even matter. My parents had a favorite. They never said it out loud, but it didn't take a genius to figure it out. My older brother, Ryan, was the golden child. He was everything they wanted in a son: athletic, popular, and most importantly, a future success story. He played varsity football, was enrolled in an expensive business school, and had my parents wrapped around his finger. Meanwhile, I was the kid who read too much, worked part-time at a bar, and dreamed about starting my own business one day. They thought I was wasting my time. Ryan never had to worry about money. My parents made sure he had everything he needed. They paid for his school, his car, his gear, whatever it was, he got it. I, on the other hand, was expected to fend for myself. If I wanted something, I had to earn it. At first, I didn't mind. I thought that was just how things worked. But after years of watching Ryan get whatever he wanted while I scraped by, the unfairness of it all started to wear me down. It wasn't just the big things, either. It was little things, like how my mom would drop everything to make Ryan a protein-packed breakfast before practice, but if I wanted eggs, I had to make them myself. Or how my dad would take Ryan out to fancy steak dinners after his games, but the only time we ever bonded was when he needed help fixing something around the house. I was basically free labor. When it was time to apply for college, I already knew what was coming. I had saved up some money for my job, hoping to at least cover part of my tuition. But when I brought it up to my parents, they shut it down fast. "You know we can't afford that," my dad said, not even looking up from his phone. "All our money is going to Ryan's education. He has a real future ahead of him." That stung. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because deep down I had still hoped for something different. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me as someone worth investing in. But no, I was just their other son, the one who didn't matter as much. I went back to my room that night, stared at the ceiling, and tried to swallow the lump in my throat. It wasn't fair, but fairness didn't exist in my house. I had learned that a long time ago. The only person who ever made me feel like I was worth something was my Uncle Mike. He lived down in Florida, running a struggling farm he bought years ago. My dad barely spoke to him after some falling out over money, but I always made an effort to keep in touch. We weren't close, but we talked on the phone every now and then, mostly on birthdays or holidays. It was nice to have at least one person in my life who didn't see me as a disappointment. Uncle Mike was different from my dad. He didn't care about fancy degrees or making it big in the corporate world. He believed in hard work, even if it didn't always pay off. During one of our calls, I mentioned how things were going at home, how I felt stuck, how I was trying to save up to move out. He listened, then told me about his own struggles. The farm wasn't doing great. The soil was bad. Nothing was growing the way he had hoped, and he was starting to think buying it was the biggest mistake of his life. "I think I got sold a dream," he admitted, "and now I'm knee-deep in dirt and regret." I could hear the frustration in his voice. He had taken a risk, and it wasn't paying off, but at least he had tried. At least he had the chance to fail on his own terms. That conversation stuck with me. More than anything, I wanted to leave. I wanted to be somewhere I wasn't constantly reminded that I wasn't good enough. I wanted a chance to prove, if only to myself, that I could make something out of my life. I just didn't know how yet. Pulling into the driveway after another long shift at the bar, all I wanted was to take off my shoes, collapse onto my bed, and forget that my life was a complete mess. But something immediately caught my eye. A brand new Jeep parked right in front of our house. Not just any Jeep, but a top-of-the-line model. The kind you see in commercials with guys in flannel shirts driving to the mountains like they're on some grand adventure. For a second, I thought maybe we had visitors. Maybe my dad finally made up with Uncle Mike, and he decided to drop by, or maybe one of Mom's friends had stopped by to show off their midlife crisis purchase. Then I saw the custom license plate, Ryan01. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. There was only one person in this house who got things handed to him like this. I walked inside, and sure enough, there was Ryan, standing in the kitchen with my parents, grinning like he had just won the lottery. My mom was practically glowing, and my dad had that rare, proud look on his face, the kind I had never seen directed at me. Ryan was thanking them, saying something about how he really needed an upgrade, how this new Jeep was more practical for his future. My mom kept saying, "We just want to make sure you have everything you need, sweetheart," while my dad patted him on the back like he had just cured a disease. Meanwhile, I stood there, still covered in the smell of stale beer and bar food, gripping my car keys so tight my knuckles turned white. My car, the one I had worked my ass off to buy, was parked down the street, an old rust bucket with a radio that only worked when you hit the dashboard just right. And these people who looked me in the eye and told me they didn't have money for my education, had just bought my brother a second brand new car. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't even thinking. The words just came out. I called them out on their hypocrisy, demanding to know how they could afford to buy Ryan a brand new Jeep, when just a few weeks ago, they told me there was no money for my college tuition. I pointed out that Ryan already had a perfectly good car, one they had also bought for him, while I had to scrape together every cent just to afford something that barely ran. The room went silent for a moment. Then my dad, without missing a beat, sighed and said, "Don't start." Ryan rolled his eyes and muttered something about how I was making a big deal out of nothing. Mom just looked at me with that tired expression, the one that said she had heard enough of my complaining for a lifetime. Then Dad spoke again, his voice sharp this time. "We invest in Ryan because we know he has a future. He's responsible. He's going places. You sit around reading books and talking about pipe dreams. You really think you're going to make it big with some random business idea? You'll end up under a bridge before you see a single dollar from that." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Not because I hadn't heard stuff like this before, I had, but because this time it was so direct, so final. They had already decided. In their minds, Ryan was the one worth betting on. I was just a lost cause. I wanted to say something. Anything. I wanted to throw my keys at them, storm out and never look back. But I knew better. Fighting with them wouldn't change anything. It never did. So instead, I just turned and walked up to my room, shutting the door behind me. I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't belong here. I had known that for years. But this was the final confirmation. They thought I was nothing. And maybe I had let them believe that for too long. But one day, I was going to prove them wrong. I wasn't going to beg for their approval. I wasn't going to try to change their minds. I was going to walk away from this house and never look back. And when I did, I'd make sure they regretted every single time they made me feel like I didn't matter. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it yet. But one thing was clear. I had never wanted something more in my life. I was halfway through another exhausting shift at the bar when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it at first, assuming it was some spam call or another promotional message about discounts I couldn't afford. But when I glanced at the screen, I saw the name Uncle Mike. I hadn't heard from him in a while, and something about the timing felt off. Stepping into the storage room for a moment of quiet, I answered. His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. He was in the hospital, and it wasn't looking good. He asked if I could come. I didn't hesitate. I told my manager I had a family emergency and left mid-shift. On my way home, I told my dad about the call. He barely looked up from his laptop, just sighed, and muttered something about Mike always being dramatic. He had written his brother off years ago and saw no reason to start caring now. Fine. If my father couldn't be bothered, I'd go alone. The next morning, I threw some clothes into a duffel bag and drove straight to the small town where Mike had been admitted. The hospital was as depressing as you'd expect. Dim fluorescent lights, walls painted in that generic comforting beige that fooled no one. Mike looked even worse than I imagined. His skin was pale, his frame thinner than I remembered, and there was a heaviness in his eyes that told me he knew exactly where this was going. We talked. He wanted to know how I'd been holding up, and I told him the truth. I told him about Ryan, the new Jeep, the way my parents never even considered investing in my future. He listened, nodding, his expression unreadable. Then, after a long silence, he admitted something that hit me hard. He had lived through the same thing. Growing up, my grandparents had treated my dad like the golden child. Mike was just the weird one, the kid who wasn't worth betting on. My dad got all the praise, the encouragement, the financial support. Mike, he got ignored, pushed aside. He had left home as soon as he could, determined to make something of himself, but life had a way of knocking people down. I had always known that Mike and my dad didn't get along, but I never realized how deep the wound ran. Over the next few days, I visited Mike as often as I could. I didn't have anywhere else to be, so I stayed in a cheap motel near the hospital, eating gas station snacks and trying not to think about what was coming. One evening, as I sat beside his hospital bed, he told me something that stopped me cold. He wanted to leave the farm to me. I laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of joke, but Mike was serious. He had always wanted me to have it. He knew it wasn't much, that it wasn't exactly thriving, but he figured I might have a better shot at making something of it than he ever did. The next day, he had a lawyer come in, and we started the process. It felt surreal, like I was signing paperwork for a life I hadn't even considered yet. But Mike was determined. He told me he had made peace with his mistakes, and if there was any way to make sure something good came out of his bad decisions, this was it. 2 days later, he was gone. The call from the hospital came early in the morning. I stared at my phone for a long time before answering, already knowing what I was about to hear. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, gripping the cheap polyester comforter, trying to process the fact that the only person in my family who had ever truly believed in me was now gone. I made the arrangements for the funeral. It wasn't much. Mike didn't have many people left in his life. My parents and Ryan came, more out of obligation than anything else. My mom cried a little. My dad just looked bored. Ryan barely put his phone away long enough to pretend he cared. After the funeral, we drove out to the farm. It was the first time my parents had seen it in years. My dad walked around, shaking his head at the overgrown fields, the old equipment, the peeling paint on the house. He muttered about how buying this place was the biggest mistake Mike ever made. Then, as if he had just come up with the most brilliant idea in the world, he turned to me and made a proposal that nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. He wanted me to sell the farm, not for myself, not to build a future for me. He thought I should sell it and put the money toward Ryan's education. Ryan's in business school, he said, like I didn't already know. A good investment. If we pool the money, we can set him up for success. Maybe, if there's something left over, you can have a little too. I stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up. I had just buried the only family member who ever gave a damn about me. And now my father was standing on the land Mike left to me, talking about how I should cash out and hand everything over to Ryan. Something inside me shifted in that moment. I had spent years feeling like I wasn't good enough, like I had to fight just to be noticed. But now I was furious. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just going to let them make this decision for me. I wasn't selling. And I was about to prove to all of them that they had underestimated me for the last time. I stood my ground. My dad was staring at me, arms crossed, his face hard like stone. My mom had that tight-lipped look she always got when she was barely holding in her frustration. Ryan, of course, was pacing like a spoiled kid who had just been told Christmas was canceled. I wasn't selling the farm. Not for Ryan. Not for anyone. This is my inheritance, I said. Mike left it to me, not to you, not to Ryan. I'm not giving it up. Ryan let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head like I had just said the dumbest thing he'd ever heard. Are you serious? You're really going to throw your life away on this dump? For what? Some weird loyalty to a guy who couldn't even keep the lights on. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That's when my dad lost it. Enough. Either you sell the farm and contribute to something worthwhile, or don't bother coming home. For a second, I actually thought he might take it back, that maybe he had said it in the heat of the moment. But no, he meant every word. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Then I guess I'm not coming home. My mom turned away, muttering something under her breath, and my dad just shook his head. Fine, do what you want. Just don't come crying to us when you end up just like Mike. Ryan smirked. Yeah, man, enjoy playing farmer. Let me know how that works out for you. And with that, They left, just like that. I watched their car disappear down the long, winding road, a heavy weight settling in my chest. This was it. I was on my own. For the first few days, I barely left the house. Not because I was scared or second-guessing myself, but because I had no idea where to even start. I had inherited a farm, but I didn't know the first thing about farming. Then my parents sent me a package. When I saw the box sitting on the porch, a tiny flicker of hope lit up inside me. Maybe they had changed their minds. Maybe they were sending something to show they still cared. Nope. Inside were my clothes, my laptop, and of course, my books. That was it. No note, no explanation. Just the bare essentials. Like they were tossing out the last pieces of me they didn't want cluttering up their perfect little world. I set up my laptop on the dusty old dining table, then stacked my books in the corner. I had everything I needed to survive. At least for now. The next few weeks were a crash course in reality. I walked the property, trying to figure out what, if anything, I could do with it. The house itself was old but livable. The barn, on the other hand, looked like it was one strong gust of wind away from collapsing. The fields? Useless. The soil was dry and cracked, like it hadn't seen a good rain in years. I ran some basic tests, read up on what might grow here, but the results weren't promising. Even the weeds seemed to struggle. Fine. So crops were out. Maybe livestock? Nope. The more I walked around, the more I noticed something else. Something worse. Snakes. Rattlesnakes. And a lot of them. I saw them sunbathing on rocks, slithering through the dry grass, disappearing into holes near the house. It wasn't just a few here and there. It was an infestation. Apparently, the land was prime real estate for them. Something about the terrain, the climate. It was perfect. Perfect for snakes. Not for farming. Not for anything useful. I spent hours researching, looking for solutions, tried to figure out if there was any way to make this work. But the more I learned, the worse it got. This wasn't just an issue. It was a disaster. No one in their right mind would want to work this land, let alone live here. For the first time since inheriting the farm, I seriously considered selling it. Maybe my dad had been right. Maybe Mike's dream had been doomed from the start. Maybe I should just cut my losses and get out while I still could. But something about that thought made my stomach turn. Because selling wasn't just about the land. It was about proving them right. And that was something I wasn't sure I could live with. So I had to figure something out. Fast. A week after my parents left me standing on my own land, I drove into town to pick up some supplies. Nothing fancy. Just some groceries, a few tools, and a strong cup of coffee to help me figure out what the hell I was doing with my life. The farm was still a giant question mark, but at least I wasn't starving. Yet, about 10 miles outside of town, I spotted a car pulled over on the side of the road. One of the tires was completely flat. Standing next to it was a young woman, petite, stylish, and clearly frustrated. She looked out of place on a country road, like she belonged in a big city, not stranded in the middle of nowhere. I pulled over, rolled down my window, and asked if she needed help. She turned around, and for a second, I forgot how to talk. She was stunning, not in some over-the-top movie star kind of way, but effortlessly beautiful. Dark hair pulled into a neat ponytail, sharp features, expensive-looking clothes that somehow still looked practical. She looked like someone who belonged in a high-rise office, not stuck on the side of the road with a busted tire. She sighed, clearly annoyed at her situation. Then she spoke, her English smooth but with a slight accent. Flat tire. I have a meeting in 30 minutes. Bad timing. I nodded, trying not to look like a total idiot. I wasn't exactly dressed to impress. Just an old t-shirt, jeans covered in dust, and work boots that had seen better days. Not the look of a guy who should be talking to a woman like this. I can change it, I offered, or I can drive you to your meeting. Whatever gets you there faster. She hesitated, then checked her watch. Driving is faster. But what about my car? I'll help you fix it after. She gave me a long look, then nodded. Okay, let's go. We got into my truck, an old beater compared to the sleek sedan she had been driving, and I pulled onto the road. The scent of her perfume filled the cab, something light and floral, completely out of place in my truck that usually smelled like coffee and gasoline. As we drove, I found out her name was May. She was Chinese, originally from Beijing, but had spent years traveling between China and the U.S. for business. She had flown in for a high-stakes negotiation related to her family's company in pharmaceuticals. She didn't give a lot of details, and I didn't press. It was clear she was used to people not asking too many questions. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to a towering glass building in the middle of the city. Whatever business she was dealing with, it was way above my pay grade. Before she got out, she turned to me. "Can you wait? 1 hour, maybe less? I want to thank you properly." I didn't have anything better to do, so I agreed. While she went inside, I walked down the street to a small cafe, ordered a black coffee, and tried to wrap my head around how strange my life had gotten. 1 minute, I was a guy living on a failing farm with more snakes than crops, and now I was waiting for a woman who looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine. About an hour later, she came out of the building, scanning the street until she spotted me. I stood, and she smiled, walking over like she had all the time in the world now. "Thank you for waiting. Let's get coffee." We sat at a small table outside, the city buzzing around us. She told me a little more about her family. Her father owned a large business, though she didn't say much about what exactly they did. She had been traveling back and forth between China and the U.S. since she was a teenager, handling different parts of the business. It was clear she was someone important, but she didn't carry herself like she expected special treatment. When she asked about me, I almost laughed. What was there to say? I told her the basics, that I had inherited a farm, that I was trying to figure out what to do with it, that my family had basically written me off. To my surprise, she didn't look at me like I was wasting my time. "A farm is a business, too," she said, stirring her tea. "Maybe not the business your father wanted, but business is business." That stuck with me. After we finished our drinks, we walked back to her car. I got to work changing the tire while she leaned against the side, watching. People drove by, she said suddenly, saw me, but no one stopped. "Why did you?" I tightened the bolt before answering. Didn't really think about it. Someone needed help, so I stopped. She nodded, like that answer was better than anything else I could have said. That's rare. Once the car was good to go, she brushed some dust off her sleeve and looked at me. "I'm here for a month. Business. We should meet again. Talk more." She handed me her phone, and I put in my number. "Tomorrow?" she asked. I wasn't about to say no. "Tomorrow." She got into her car, drove off, and I stood there for a moment, watching the taillights disappear down the road. Then I got into my truck and started the drive back home, my mind racing the whole way. For the first time in a long time, I felt like something in my life was actually about to change. That night, back at the farm, I couldn't get May out of my head. It wasn't just that she was beautiful, though, let's be real, that didn't hurt. It was the way she carried herself. She had this quiet confidence, like she belonged anywhere she went. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, and yet she did. I wasn't used to someone like her actually being interested in talking to me. Most of the women I had met saw a guy like me, small town, working class, barely scraping by, and immediately lost interest. But May had actually listened, asked questions, and seemed genuinely curious about my life. The more I thought about it, the more I wanted to see her again. By morning, I gave up pretending I wasn't thinking about her and picked up my phone. I hesitated for half a second before calling. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth and calm like she had been expecting me. I told her I wanted to meet up again, that I had a million questions about China and wanted to hear more about her life. She agreed without hesitation. Same cafe. Noon. I spent the next few hours trying not to look like I had actually planned what I was going to wear, which, of course, I had. I wasn't exactly working with a high-end wardrobe, but at least I made sure my shirt didn't smell like I had just spent the morning shoveling dirt. When I got to the cafe, she was already there, sitting by the window, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, smiled, and just like that, the whole world felt lighter. We grabbed coffee and took a walk through the city, the kind of thing that felt completely normal but somehow different with her. I asked her everything I could think of about China, what it was like growing up there, the food, the cities, the culture. I had always been fascinated by it, but hearing it straight from someone who had lived it made it feel even more real. She told me about the bustling streets of Beijing, the contrast between ancient temples and towering skyscrapers, the food markets where you could find the best dumplings in the world, a tiny stall in an alleyway. She talked about the pressure of coming from a wealthy family, how she had always been expected to be part of the business, how she sometimes wondered what it would be like to live a different kind of life. In return, I told her about America, not just the big things she already knew, but the little things. The late-night diner runs, high school football games where the whole town showed up, the weird but comforting smell of a Home Depot on a Saturday afternoon. The kind of details no one thinks about until they realize how much they miss them. We talked for hours. The conversation just flowed, like we had known each other for years instead of just a couple of days. By the time we finished, it felt natural to make plans to see each other again. And then it just became routine. Every day we met up, sometimes for lunch, sometimes just for a walk. She started opening up more, sharing things about her family, her future, her uncertainties about where she really fit in. I did the same, telling her things I had never really said out loud about my parents, about Ryan, about how I was trying to figure out if I even had a future on that damn farm. One evening, she asked if she could see the farm. I almost laughed at the idea of bringing someone like her out there, but she was serious. She wanted to see where I lived, where I was trying to build something. So the next afternoon, I picked her up, and we drove the long stretch of road back to my land. She didn't judge the place, didn't comment on the dust or the half-collapsed barn, or the fact that the only things thriving on my land were snakes and regrets. Instead, she seemed interested in everything, asking questions about what I had planned, what I thought I could do with the space. We sat on the porch as the sun started to set, drinking cheap beer because that was all I had in the fridge. She told me she liked the quiet out here, that it was so different from a chaos city. I realized then that I wasn't just drawn to her because she was interesting or beautiful or from a world I didn't understand. I was drawn to her because, for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone actually saw me, and I could tell she felt the same way. A few weeks passed, and everything felt almost too good to be real. May and I spent nearly every day together, exploring the city, talking for hours, laughing at the weird little differences between our cultures. She was smart, curious, and had this way of making me feel like I actually mattered, like I wasn't just some guy stuck on a dying farm. Then one evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sky turn orange and pink, she told me something that hit like a brick. Her time in the U.S. was almost up. She had to return to China soon. I tried to play it cool, but my heart sank. I had known this was temporary, but knowing something and feeling it were two different things. Then she looked at me, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. "Come with me?" I blinked, thinking I had misheard, but she was serious. "You always wanted to see China. Now's your chance. My family has a huge house. My parents already know about you. I told them how you helped me. They want to meet you." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's nice, but I don't exactly have the kind of money for a trip to China." She waved off my concern like it was nothing. "My father already sent the money. Everything's covered. You just have to say yes." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just asking me to visit. She wanted me in her world. I thought about my so-called life here, a farm I didn't know what to do with, a family that had written me off, a future that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And now, here was May, handing me a golden ticket to a place I had always wanted to see, with someone who actually wanted me around. I said yes. The flight to China was the longest I'd ever been on, and by the time we landed, I felt like I had left a piece of my soul somewhere over the Pacific. The sheer size of the city we landed in, Shanghai, was overwhelming. Skyscrapers stretched endlessly, neon lights lit up the streets even though it was nearly midnight, and the airport alone felt like it could swallow my entire hometown. We didn't stay in Shanghai long. After a short layover, We took another flight to a smaller city called Hangzhou. May told me it was famous for its beautiful lakes and history, but all I could focus on was the insane contrast between ancient temples and high-tech buildings. From there, we took a car ride out to her family home. And when I say home, I don't mean a regular house. I mean a mansion. The place was massive, a blend of traditional Chinese architecture and modern luxury. It had courtyards, koi ponds, carved wooden doors that looked like they belonged in a museum. Her parents were waiting for us when we arrived. Her mother was elegant, dressed in a simple but expensive-looking silk dress. Her father looked like a man who had never once worried about money a day in his life. Despite their wealth, they were warm and welcoming, speaking fluent English and making me feel at home instantly. We had dinner that night, a feast of dishes I couldn't even begin to pronounce, but everything tasted incredible. May's father asked me about America, saying he had visited a few times. We talked about business, culture, and all the little things people never think about when imagining another country. Then he asked about me. "What do you do?" he said, sipping his tea. I hesitated for a second, feeling that familiar weight of shame creep in. I inherited a farm. My parents wanted me to sell it and give the money to my brother, but I refused. Now I don't really know what to do with it. The land is bad, the soil is useless, and it's crawling with rattlesnakes. The moment I mentioned the snakes, May's father perked up. Rattlesnakes? Many of them? I nodded. Yeah, way too many. It's like they own the place. He leaned back in his chair, considering something. Then he smiled, just a small, knowing smile. "I think this week I will show you what we do for business. I believe you will find it interesting." I glanced at May, but she just shrugged like she was just as curious as I was. I had no idea what he was talking about, but something in the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. And for the first time since landing in China, I started to wonder if maybe I had just stepped into something much bigger than I could have imagined. Time flew by faster than I expected. 1 month in China turned into 2, and before I knew it, I had seen more of the country than I ever imagined. May and I traveled everywhere, Beijing, Xi'an, Guilin. We walked along the Great Wall, visited ancient monasteries, and ate food so good I knew I'd never be able to look at American takeout the same way again. Everywhere we went, May made sure I understood the history, the culture, the little details that most tourists missed. It was like she was letting me into a world she had never fully shared with anyone before, and I loved every second of it. Then one evening, as we were standing on a hillside overlooking a quiet village in a remote province, I did something I never thought I'd do. I asked her to marry me. It wasn't planned. There was no ring, no big speech. It just happened. 1 second we were talking. The next I was looking at her and realizing I never wanted to leave her side. She cried, and then she said yes. I wasn't sure how her parents would take the news. I mean, sure, they liked me, but marriage was a whole different level. But when we told them, they surprised me. They were happy, excited. Even her father laughed and said their family was finally going to be international. Her mother just smiled and said May had always done things her own way, so this was no surprise. A few months later, we had a traditional Chinese wedding. It was nothing like I had expected. There were elaborate tea ceremonies, red and gold decorations everywhere, and customs I barely understood but loved experiencing. It was overwhelming in the best possible way, and before I knew it, I was officially a married man. And that's when May's father finally said it was time to show me his business. He had mentioned it before, but every time I asked, he would wave me off and say we'd talk about it soon. Now that I was part of the family, soon had finally arrived. We drove a few hours outside the city, past villages and rice fields, until we reached a facility that looked more like a research lab than a farm. Inside, workers moved efficiently, tending to large glass enclosures filled with one thing I never expected to see: snakes. Lots of them. Not just any snakes, either. May's father explained that they specialize in breeding and harvesting venom from certain species for pharmaceutical use. Apparently, snake venom was used in medicine for everything from painkillers to anti-venom treatments. The skins were sold to luxury brands, and even the meat was considered a delicacy in some places. It was a multi-million-dollar industry. I couldn't believe it. My entire life, rattlesnakes had been nothing but a nuisance, a reason my farm was useless. And here was a man making a fortune off something I had spent years seeing as a problem. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing back to the farm back home. The snakes. The land I thought was worthless. I told May about my thoughts, half expecting her to laugh. Instead, she sat up, considering it. "Why not try?" she said. "If it works, great. If not, we sell the farm and move on." For the first time in my life, I had a plan, and it involved going back home. Landing back in Florida felt surreal. The last time I had been here, I was just some guy stuck with a farm full of snakes, no direction, no money, and a family that had ripped me off. Now, I was returning with a wife, a plan, and actual capital to make something happen. May's father had given us enough money to start properly, something I had never thought I'd have. It wasn't just a handout. He believed in what we were doing. He saw potential where I had only seen failure. We got to work immediately. First, we hired experts, people who actually knew how to handle venomous snakes without getting themselves killed. They helped us set up proper enclosures, design safe working conditions, and create a process for extracting venom that met all the strict regulations. This wasn't some backyard operation. We were building something real. At first, it was slow. Locals were skeptical, and honestly, I couldn't blame them. The idea of turning a failing farm into a snake research and tourism business wasn't exactly normal. But word got around. The novelty of it attracted curious visitors, and before long, we were giving small tours. People loved it. The thrill of seeing real rattlesnakes up close, the explanations from our trained handlers, even the weird little did you know, facts about venom and its uses. It all worked. We leaned into the educational side of it, partnering with universities, conservationists, and even medical researchers. Before I knew it, we had school field trips, documentary crews, and even the occasional celebrity looking for something exotic to post about online. A year in, and our farm wasn't just surviving, it was booming. The venom we extracted was shipped to specialized laboratories, used to develop antivenom and cutting-edge pharmaceuticals. The snake skins? Those went to high-end fashion brands for belts, boots, and handbags that cost more than my first car. And the meat? Turns out there was a market for canned rattlesnake meat in gourmet restaurants and specialty stores around the world. What had once been a useless plot of land was now pulling in hundreds of thousands in revenue. Tourism exploded. What started as a handful of visitors turned into thousands of people a month. We had guided tours, interactive exhibits, even a small gift shop selling everything from preserved snake specimens to T-shirts that said, "I survived a rattlesnake ranch." One day, as I stood outside watching a crowd of tourists line up for a tour, May walked up beside me. She looked around, smiling, and then turned to me. "So," she said, "still think this farm was a bad idea?" I laughed, shaking my head. Not even a little. A year ago, I had been lost. Now, I was running one of the most unique businesses in the region. And the best part? I had done it my way. Success is a funny way of attracting people who once ignored you. One day, as I stood outside watching a tour group snap photos in front of our farm's main entrance, I saw something I never expected. My parents' car. And my brother was with them. They pulled up like they owned the place, stepping out with the kind of arrogance I had grown up resenting. My dad scanned the farm, his eyes narrowing as he took in the crowd, the professional-looking staff, the massive enclosures housing our rattlesnakes. My mom had her usual expression, half disapproval, half surprise. Ryan, though, looked like he had just walked onto the set of a reality show. "So," he said, "this is what you've been up to?" I could already tell where this was going. They weren't here to congratulate me. They weren't here to apologize for throwing me out. They were here because they saw success, and in their minds, success was something that should belong to Ryan. It didn't take long before my dad started talking about how I should think about the family, and how Ryan is more experienced in business, and should have a controlling share of the farm. My mom chimed in about how it would be the smart decision, how Ryan could help take it to the next level. Ryan, of course, played along, putting on his best corporate face, telling me he could streamline operations and handle the branding better. as if I hadn't built this from the ground up. Then, because he couldn't help himself, he looked over and saw a maid talking to one of the handlers. He smirked. Wow, you even have your own staff from China? That's next level, man. I felt my fist clench. Before I could say anything, May turned, walked over, and slipped her hand into mine. I'm his wife, she said simply. Ryan blinked, then let out a laugh. You married her? Seriously? You couldn't find it normal. That was it. I wasn't about to stand there and let my family disrespect my wife in my own home. I told them, in no uncertain terms, to leave. I told them they weren't my family anymore, that the people standing beside me, the people who had believed in me, were my real family. They hurled a few last insults, claiming I'd fail, that the business would collapse, that I'd come crawling back. But I didn't care. I watched them drive off, realizing, maybe for the first time, that I was truly free of them. The farm continued to thrive, but soon we didn't even need to be there daily. We hired top professionals to run operations, and for the first time, May and I could step back. That's when she told me she wanted to return to China, to have our child there. It made sense. Her family was there, and with the way our businesses were growing, we had the flexibility to split our time between countries. So we moved back, overseeing her father's company as he gradually passed down responsibilities to us. We had a team of experts managing both businesses, and suddenly life became more than just work. It became about experiences. We bought a house in China, a place of our own, and later, another one back in the U.S. We traveled the world, exploring places we had both only dreamed about, and then our daughter was born and everything changed again. Looking back, I realized something. Life had thrown me a challenge. An old, useless farm, a family that didn't believe in me, a future that seemed like a dead end. But I took what I had, found an opportunity in the most unexpected place, and turned it into something incredible. Just like that old saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Only in my case, it was rattlesnakes. And I wouldn't have it any other way.